we love to say education is a right, but we don't always say quality education is a right. So we spend a lot of time in our schools around how do we walk, how do we talk, how do we speak to our students, how do we speak about ourselves amongst our students, how do we speak about the community, high expectations, high levels of accountability. And slowly but surely, hope arises. Slowly but surely, it starts bleeding into the community. And that's beautiful to see. And then she tells them, and then they say, oh, that's hard. Is how kids struggle to converse and express their emotions and express their thoughts, string it in a sentence. Really, really wide, and it's complex and it's beautiful and it's broken and it needs people to pay attention to it and think about it in a new, innovative way.
Good morning, Sanri. Thank you very much for your time. You are from Apex Schools. I have read that, I actually want to read this at the beginning where you said that I'm fortunate to be part of an organization that collectively works to improve the quality of education in South Africa, especially within lower income communities. So I'm assuming that is where Apex is positioned. So please take a few moments and tell us about yourself, introduce yourself, and tell us about Apex. You know, what do you do?
No problem. Thank you so much. Yeah, so as Harry said, my name is Sanri. I'm the head of blended learning at Apex Education. We are an NPC that focuses to build and run high quality schools within the low income context of South Africa. So our journey started in public schools. So today I'm sitting in Apex Eerste Rivier, which is a no-fee government school that we partnered with. That's got about 1,200 students here in Eerste Rivier community. And then from there, we started building a model that we feel is scalable, that is sustainable, and that financially can be managed, specifically within private schools set up for a lower fee client, if I can call them clients. And so currently what we have is we've got two schools, one in Stellenbosch called Apex Stellenbosch, right next to Kayamandi community, and then opened in January one in Pinelands, Thornton area in Conradi Park, and then hoping to open 10 schools in 10 years and seat 10,000 students per year, to reach as many as possible students. And the main goal of this is to say in South Africa, there's a great difference between the educational offering you get when you can go to an X Model C school or to a private school versus our no-fee public schools. And we don't believe that is ethically right. So we love to say all children, we love to say education is a right, but we don't always say quality education is a right. And that's what we strive for in our company, is to say, let's create schools that's of high quality, regardless of where the child comes from economically.
Well, definitely hats off to you on that one. That
Thank
is
you.
very, very nice to hear. But what are the practical implications? I mean, I totally agree with you. Let me just say that I totally agree with you that the parents' money shouldn't buy the child's level of quality of education. That is definitely not right. I don't really know why there is such a discrepancy in terms of school fees. You know, whether you are a very elite school or whether you, or I'm talking from a teacher perspective now, whether you are working for a very elite school or whether you are working for a no fee paying school, why does that change the level of education that you as an educator can provide? I do understand the circumstances of the learners, and we hopefully will talk about that in this podcast, where the environment for learning changes. But why would it have an impact on the educator side? Or am I wrong? Doesn't it really matter, or is it just a question of exhaustion? You know, with overcrowded, low fee schools where the teachers just cannot cope with the large amount of admin and work. Try and convince me why this is happening. I'm very interested.
Right. So I think it's quite a layered response. The answer is not simple. There's a few things. There are the things that I think will be the popular response. So let me give you that first. The popular response would be Public schools in no-fee, low-fee areas are under-resourced, large classes, so you're sitting with 50 to 60 kids in a class with one adult having to manage them. You don't necessarily have enough staff. Sometimes you struggle with high absenteeism amongst staff due to various reasons. And then you obviously sit with all the social economic challenges of the community in which you work. Sometimes it's dangerous to go to work. Sometimes your kids can't go to work due to the circumstances of the context. And so those things definitely play a difference. The less popular response is that for us, we believe that when you have high expectations, you have high results. So we have experienced that the expectation for a child that comes from poverty is less than the expectation for a child that is in a affluent school. We've had people that sit in very high positions visit our schools and say, yeah, but these type of kids or our kids won't be able to amount to anything. We don't believe it's the child. We unfortunately believe it's often the adult. And that does not always make us popular, Harry. I must be honest with you.
Wow.
But so what we follow in our schools is it's not something that we created. It's called leverage leadership, and leverage leadership is based, or instructional leadership rather, it comes from the book Leverage Leadership, is based on these pillars that we believe make a school great, and they're school culture. So what is it? What is the culture of a school? And if you don't create a school culture, it will create itself. So if you're not intentional around the culture of my school, there will be a culture created, and it might not be something that you wished for. So we spend a lot of time in our schools around how do we walk, how do we talk, how do we speak to our students, how do we speak about ourselves amongst our students, how do we speak about the community, high expectations, high levels of accountability. So our kids get taught responsibility from the get-go, but in a very structured, respectful manner. And then with school culture, there's also staff culture. And so things like instructional coaching for us. When you graduate in South Africa as a teacher, you are theoretically taught to deal with a theoretical class. The reality of the South African class does not look like that textbook. You walk into a grade 8 class in South Africa, you have children reading on a grade 4 level. As a high school teacher, you are not taught to teach kids how to read with understanding because you are prepping for a 15-year or 14-year-old child. So in your class, you sit with a major diverse group of kids that you're not equipped to teach, and nobody coaches or develops you like in other professions. So we believe that coaching component is vital. Like you have to, all of our teachers get coached, our principals get coached, and trained as instructional leaders. And then looking at the data. And when you look at scholar data on a daily basis and you obsess over it, that's when the needle starts moving. So to give you like a blanket response, I think it's happening from the teacher's perspective. They enter in a school that's not highly functional. They're not equipped necessarily fresh from university to deal with this complex dynamic that you're dealing with in a classroom. And then the expectations are low for the kids and for the teachers often. And so what happens is you get stuck in the spiral of just like not effective teaching taking place. And everybody loses. The teacher loses and the child loses.
Have you had any dealings with the LEAP Institute at all?
With the LEAP Institute.
LEAP Institute, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So we know each other, and so some of the LEAP Institute, like other previous people that work there or are still involved, we correspond quite often. So
you have met and spoken to Zonke?
No, I haven't spoken to Zonke.
Okay,
no.
well, she was one of the previous guests on this podcast, and she spoke about exactly the same problem that they've got, you know, in, for instance, in township schools in the Cape Flats, where gangsterism is rife. And I've had a subsequent discussion as well. The same topic came up, you know, and the second episode that I did was with a school principal up in rural KwaZulu-Natal, you know, Northern Vryheid. And the same problem came out, you know, where it's really difficult for these kids to, like you call it expectations. I used to call it ambition, you know. So one of these guests, I think it was actually the lady, I can't remember the name now, Giselle, I think, where I said, but why do these kids not have ambition? Because me, as a tutor, I'm a tutor, I'm not a teacher, so I just need to define that clearly, that as a teacher, you need to have so much hair on your teeth. I don't even have that. I cannot cope in a classroom. So hats off to a teacher that goes to school day in and day out and still try and manage. I mean, the reality, as you explained it, 50, 60 kids in a classroom, that's bad. Zonke gave the example of a school in Umtata in Eastern Cape, where when she walks in, there's 100 grade 12 learners in the class and they're sharing chairs. I mean, imagine that. You're in your final year, you're sharing chairs. And from where I'm sitting, often I find that as a tutor, I'm trying to work with the learners after school. I've got the principle that in school, in the classroom, a teacher, no matter what the size of the class is, you have at most maybe 1 or 2 minutes per child in a typical period. That's the reality. That's the mathematics behind it. You cannot argue that away or sugarcoat it away. That is the reality. So a teacher has to do a blanket approach when they teach new things because they have to get through their curriculum. That child may not grasp everything that was taught in class, even though the intention of the teacher was good. And when they get home and they need to now master that, develop and master whatever they learned, there's no support structure for them there. So that is where I'm coming in, just for a little bit of perspective. I'm focusing on that area after school in the evenings when they need support, but the teacher is no longer there. So I found a lot of students would not buy into this. They don't really get what I'm trying to do for them. And I called it ambition or lack of ambition. Because I'm saying, you know what, you need to master mathematics, my subject, but whichever subject, you need to master this. You're going to be assessed soon. You're going to write exams about it. Those exams are going to determine your future. So I said this. I actually said, why is there no ambition? And I was literally tapped on the fingers, for that. Because the word ambition, I think this was Zonke, that said, you know what, you need to define, first of all, what is ambition for a child who sits in Umtata 2 on a chair. What exactly is ambition? And then eventually it came out to be not ambition, but aspiration. And you've just now redefined it again by saying expectation. The kids come to school with a very low expectation. So I'm going to throw this back to you and say, what do we do about that? It's very easy to talk about expectations about going to university and getting a good job or starting your own business, having a successful career, whichever that might be, or whatever that might be one day. But how do we breed that aspiration, expectation, ambition on a younger level?
So this is something we spend a lot of time talking about and trying to flesh out and get to the bottom of it. And we actually now refer to it as intrinsic motivation. And this is the focus of our schools this year. One of the themes that we're looking at is how do you develop intrinsic motivation? Now, once again, it's not I don't think there is unfortunately, a quick recipe for this, It stems from character development. It stems from creating a growth mindset. But more importantly, Harry, it's exactly the thing that you spoke to about the child in Umtata sharing a desk with 100 grade 12 learners. If you think back to Maslow hierarchies of needs, and you think about the basic needs that first need to be fulfilled, like feeling safe, like having food, feeling safe, those type of things. When you come from a community that focus solely on survival, there's only short-term plans. There's only tomorrow. There's only month end. It's a game of survival. And what we have seen is that it takes time to teach these kids to lift their heads and look beyond tomorrow and see, there's after tomorrow, there's after next week, and there's options. So it's a combination of things. Maybe I can share with you quickly what we do to speak to them.
Yeah, please.
So, like I said, we spend a lot of time thinking about the school culture, but we also had to go and ask ourselves and have the hard conversations to say, is what we're doing at the moment really working? Now, Apex Eerste Rivier, that's the public school, has amazing results, and we're really proud of them, and they work incredibly hard. But we knew that to build more schools like Apex High School is firstly financially impossible. It's a constant fundraising struggle. But secondly, exactly that thing that you spoke about, having 50 or 40 kids in a class, even as an adult, that's like 1 or 2 minutes per child that you get to spend. And we wanted to go relook at that and say, how can I support a child in a way that learning takes place every day, that they have that pastoral care that's vital in the South African school system, that they're building relationships, but in a way that we can scale it. It's a difficult question to answer. And so what we did is we started just after COVID with a small pilot class here at Apex Esterrivier. We took 37 kids that didn't have a space in the school, and we said, we are going to use the lessons that our teachers created during COVID on Moodle at that point, that were pretty substandard. Let's be honest, like dogs barking and kids crying, and those that know the 404 error code will have the trauma of what that brings when you're in your house trying to figure out an LMS for the first time. But we had those lessons, and we said, okay, let's see what we can do. And so that pilot started in 2021. After that first year, those students were grade 8, they started in May. So they missed the first 4 months of high school. We don't use a selection criteria. They were the next 37 on the list that didn't have a space in school. We had a communication with the parents. We said, look, these kids will be part of our school, same uniform, same sports teams, but their class is going to look different. And we haven't done this. We're going to try it. But the parents were just like, there's great trust in the school and what they offer, but also I think desperation of just wanting your child to be in a school and be safe. So we started at the end of that year, those kids, those 37 kids outperformed the second best class in the grade in the face-to-face classes. They wrote the same assessments. And that gave us a little bit of courage. And we're like, okay, well, we have seen people teach 100 kids. Let's size up. So the next year we opened a class here on the premises. We took in 100 grade 8 students, 2 facilitators. So this is now the game changer from both a financial point of view, but also the adult to child ratio, because now you're sitting with a 1 to 33 adult to child ratio. And we knew that this model will work if you ramp up the data. So we built a dashboard that feeds live data to the teacher and the facilitators on every quiz question that the child is answering. So what you get now is, firstly, you create a culture where you have growth mindset, where you teach the values, where you teach children structure and discipline, and you motivate them daily. But you also have responsive teaching, is what we call it. You have a teacher and facilitator every day responding to what you struggle with. Ooh, these 5 kids can't do question number 2. I'm pulling the 5 kids aside, and I'm just teaching them on question number 2 while the rest continue. So nobody gets lost. It's very difficult for a 14-year-old child to get intrinsic motivation when they read on a grade 4 level and nobody's taking care of it. And it's not the teacher's fault necessarily, because the system failed them. So now all of a sudden, every child gets seen, every child gets supported, plus they have this culture that we create very intentionally. And slowly but surely, hope arises and a child starts seeing. We have a boy in one of our schools that is on the spectrum, and he really struggled in mainstream school. And as a last resort, his parents came to us and we said, look, we don't specialize in special needs, but the child is more than welcome to give it a go. That boy is now grade 10. He has passed grade 8 and 9 all by himself. He flourishes in this blended learning model. He's taking autonomy over his own learning. He gets to use different platforms and ways of learning that works for him. And something is sparking inside of him. And now he knows, like, it's possible. And that's one story. Where we are now, just maybe for some context, Harry, is the 2 schools that we built since then, Apex Stellenbosch and Apex Binance, our high school offering is completely blended. So in every class, there's 100 students. In every class, there's 1 teacher and 2 facilitators. We've revamped our content. We have, at the moment, 4,000 CAPS-aligned lessons built. And every lesson has got data points very intentionally inserted in. And our teachers and our facilitators are trained and coached on a daily basis to look at the data and not wait for a June exam and then get the shock of your life because PT now unfortunately failed, although PT has been nodding his head for 6 months in class, seemingly knowing what's going on. So I think it's a combination of things to create that motivation, but you have to let kids see that there's a world outside. Some of our children have never been to the beach. They've definitely never been to the airport. They don't know anyone that has ever flown. So how do you create curriculum? This is the other thing. How do you create curriculum that speaks to a child that hasn't had the exposure that you and I might have had as a 14-year-old. When you teach something like tourism, it's about international and national airports. If I've never been to an airport, how must I understand boarding passes and wrapping my bag and why it's important? So with blended learning, we take them on a virtual tour to Cape Town International Airport. They can see it, and slowly but surely their world gets bigger. And when your world gets bigger, you start realizing that what you're dealing with can be overcome.
I want to take my hat off to you again, a second time, because this is really, really excellent. And I think that the idea of blended learning, because I've been exposed to blended learning and flipped classrooms over the years, and I was always told this is not going to work, especially the idea of the flipped classroom. It's just not going to work. And I sort of like agree with that. But the blended learning approach is something that I've always believed can work if the teacher is willing, number one, and if the necessary resources are there. So you're talking about a virtual tour, to Cape Town International. Giselle, that I spoke to before, she was telling me when I think it was her, that said, she used to have Skype conversations with students in Sweden and Finland and America and so forth, just to expose her learners to other cultures, other people. And the one thing that she said was very important is suddenly students realized that, okay, we're not the only ones who battle with English as a second language. When they speak to Chinese kids, that, oh, okay, they also struggling with pronunciation and so forth. And just that exposure, to other people. She used to go to close to where you are now, Canal Walk, and then send the kids pictures and videos of, listen, this is where I am. Because those children had just never been out of the township. They've got no idea what Canal Walk is, or a wine farm. And that's where the idea of aspiration replaced ambition. Because we want the kids to just have or to aspire just to something better. But they need to know what that something is, to aspire to. And you're calling it expectations, that the kids must have. And I think it's a different angle on the same thing, where they need to start expecting more of themselves. They need to hold themselves to a higher standard than what the system expects of them. Because the system expects of them to pass by 30%, just get through, just go. Whereas they must have a higher expectation. So do you agree with that?
No, absolutely. I absolutely agree with it. And it's something that we work on very hard to bring home. And it's challenging to say, like, 30% is not what you should aim for. Now, I must say, I do get quite frustrated when I'm at a braai and somebody makes comments, and I've done it before, will make comments in the line of, can anyone still fail matric? Because what that speaks to is privilege. Because if you haven't had to write a final exam, the most important exam of your life as a scholar, hungry, cold, we've had kids who've been assaulted and then arrive with the wounds to finish the exam before they go to the clinic to get stitched up. We've had kids, last year we had 3 deaths in the final exam. One boy unfortunately committed suicide. It shook his class. Young men, 18 years old, writing the exam with tears streaming down their face, having to write mathematics. We've had girls assaulted on their way to school. They arrive to school, they're like, ma'am, I want to finish my exam. Obviously, you have things like teenage pregnancies and those type of things. So I often think when people say things like, okay, 30% is not enough, it's not enough, because we know it doesn't open doors. But we also have to be sensitive to being like almost blind to the fact that for some kids, 30% is, to get to that 30% means they're pitched up every day, which is a miracle if you know what happens before that. But that being said, definitely we work very hard on teaching our kids to want more for themselves, to look around and say, is this where I want to be? And if it's not, how am I going to get out? How am I going to get out of where I want to be? But I also want to say a very big part of that lies with the teachers and expecting more of our teachers. Now, I know this is a contradiction because we think more of our teachers that already work so hard, they do work very hard. But when we recruit, for example, we recruit on a completely different way. Anybody that applies for the job, for the position, that is qualified, we invite to come write a competency test. So if you are a grade 9 mathematics teacher, you come and write a grade 9 mathematics competency test. Harry, majority fails. Majority gets below 80%. And these are teachers that have been teaching for years. So if you're brand new out of university, I can understand that and I forgive you because I feel like you haven't had the exposure and we will develop you. But if you have been teaching for years and you cannot pass a competency test on the level that you are teaching, you are failing the child. You are the problem. And so it's a community effort to raise the standard and expect more. We expect a lot of our teachers. We support them a lot. And what I found is that that is what teachers want. Because at the end of the day, if you're in the profession for the right reason, the gift of being able to teach a well-disciplined class that's open to learning, that's the biggest gift you can give a teacher. That makes them flourish because they feel seen, they feel like they can do what they were called to do. It is a calling at the end of the day. So I think it's about raising the standard and pushing kids to expect more of themselves, but we also expect our parents to do more. We also expect our teachers to do more. We expect a lot from our principals and our school leaders. It's raising that expectation across the board. And when a mom phones you and says, yeah, but he said he is going to school, to sometimes have that hard conversation and say, are you fine with him lying? Or will there be consequences because he chose not to be truthful? So what are we going to do about it? And taking hands then and building that community together.
So it is very much a different structure approach because you've got the parents, you've got the teachers, you've got the school environment, the management, you've got the kids, you've got the social environment in which they grow up, the community. There's so many layers in all of this, and it's almost like the chicken and the egg situation. You know, what comes first? Because where do you start? You can, you know, and I would like to hear your opinion on this because that's the world in which you live and work. Where does one start? Do you start with the parents, you know, to motivate the kids? Do you start with the teachers to just smile even though they don't feel like it? You start with the learners? I mean, you can't do much about the gangsterism, you know, you can't do much about the poverty, you can't do much about the social environment in which, the social economics in which these children live. But it is still something that needs to be addressed ultimately, you know. But where does one start? I mean, that's an intriguing question for me.
No, very good question. Yeah, so when we appoint new teachers and we start at the beginning of the year, we start with a 10-day induction training where we train them on anything from classroom management techniques. We use the Teach Like a Champion techniques as our basis, classroom management techniques, internalization of lesson planning lessons, etc. There's also a big part that focuses on the reality. We call it like the real picture of the South African education system. And then in that session with our teachers, we show them all the ugly that often is hidden. You know, when we report on matric results, those aren't the real results because it doesn't include the kids that we lost on the way from grade 1. So we report on the real results and we say to teachers, these are the realities. 81% of our kids entering grade 8 reads on the grade 4 level. Every year we test them, every year that's the result. This is the reality. What can we not change? Things like gangsterism, things like violence at home, things like poverty-stricken areas. But what do we have power over? And then we hone in on that. And that is to create an environment that's inspirational, that's safe, that's structured, that's supportive, so that when a child enters our gates, they know this is where I am safe. And this is where I get to learn and develop and grow and dream beyond my current circumstances. My teacher cannot change my home life necessarily, although obviously there are certain things that you can do when you know there's something to report on. But in this place, this is my happy place. This is where I get food. This is where I get fed. My mind gets fed. So that's the one big push. Then we hone in on the children first. But we inform the teachers, the parents along the line. So we involve them. For example, at Apex Esterefie, the founding principal here, during COVID, she started sending a voice note every morning. Hi parents, hi children, this is the weather, this is what the president is saying. It looks like so many days till lockdown is over. we had Facebook school in the beginning. So they said, okay, today on Facebook school, this is our schedule. The school ended up winning a prize for not losing any school days. There will be food parcels dropped off at this corner, like just chatting to the parents every morning. When lockdown stopped, she thought she'll now stop doing this. And then all of a sudden the parents were like, where's our voice note? So it became, for 5 years after that, every single morning, and now the new principal that we appointed from this year on, he's doing the same thing. Every morning it's sending a voice message to the community. And sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's speaking about the gang fights happening outside of the school gate and saying, like, this needs to stop. Our kids need to get to school. Or parents, you must walk together. They call it a human taxi. You must walk as a human taxi with your kids to school today. We need them here. It's exam time. It's like taking hands with the community. But then the majority of the investment takes place in the school, with the kids, working with them, developing them, supporting them, working with the staff. Slowly but surely, it starts bleeding into the community. And that's beautiful to see. That moment of community starting to trust the school and seeing the school as a beacon of hope. Then all walks of life starts protecting the school. Which I think is, when the principals and the management team stand outside of the school in the morning, they walk the community to go fetch the kids. You have your tannies giving samosas on the corners. You have your uncles asking if they can help paint something. It becomes the community's place, and that's a winning situation.
I'll be very honest with you. When I asked my question about the chicken and the egg, where do you start? I didn't really expect a solid answer, but you just provided one. Again, well done, because what you are doing, and I'm summarizing, and you can correct me if you think I've got it slightly wrong, but I think what you are doing is you are creating ownership in the school. And the best place to start there, or start with that, is with the learners. And you mentioned my safe place. This is where I get fed. This is where I can, at least, if I'm sick or tired, they will not shout at me if I need to lie down. There is, I'm assuming there is proper security. So, nobody can just come in and disrupt the classroom. I mean, that is brilliant. My mouth is actually hanging open with the genius of that approach. I should have thought of that when I asked the question, but I didn't. So it's brilliant to start with the learners and creating ownership in the school. That will create expectations of better understanding, better learning, if I'm right, because they want to aspire now. To do more, because they have experienced something outside of the rut that they've been living in and experienced for such a long time. So well done on that. Really well done.
I mean, thanks. It's definitely not me. It's definitely a massive team effort. We have exceptional leaders in our schools, and exceptional teachers as well. But you know what, Harry? The thing is, it's not. We often have visitors coming to visit the schools, sometimes existing schools, and the principals will come and they'll meet with our principals, or they'll meet with our head of schools, and they'll ask her, like, how can we do this? And then she tells them, and then they say, oh, that's hard. And then she says, yes. But possible, right? But possible. And so I think that's kind of my comment on it is what we've seen is that maybe just a quick story. When the president announced the lockdown, one of the kids went to the principal and said, but ma'am, surely we're going to stay open. And she says, well, we can't stay open because the president said we can't stay open. And the child said, but we a private school. And at that point, I mean, this is Epic's Eerste is not a private school, it's public school. It's a no-fee public school. But in that child's mind, he was attending a private school because it gave him that sense of like, almost, I don't want to call it elitism, it's not the right word. But like when I'm here, I arrive because we stand for something. On the flip side of that, I want to say it's not, our decisions are driven always by what's best for the kids. And that is not always the most popular with adults. So, for example, if you know that it's the best for the children to not let them go home 12 days before the term ends because you have marking to do, then you're not going to let them go home. You're going to do intervention classes because that's what's best for the child. And sometimes I always laugh because sometimes we tell this to people up front in interviews, but I do sometimes find that some colleagues are shocked when we actually focus on what's good for the children, because unfortunately in a lot of schools adults make the calls for adults and not for kids. And this sometimes looks unpopular or a bit like controversial. In the beginning, when we opened Apex Esterrivier, there was the feeding scheme. Because we're a government school, we get a feeding scheme provided by government. They served porridge at, like, let's say 7:30 in the morning. Then kids started arriving late. Sometimes it's because of transport, which they can't help. Other times they are just late. And the principal said, well, if you're not here at 7:30, you don't get breakfast. And then people said, but this is inhumane. How can you? So she had this beautiful response. And for me, it also actually really helped to understand what it means to solve the problem within a community. She said, this child's circumstances is not going to change when he turns 18 magically. He is still going to rely on the trains. He's still going to rely on the taxi. So what he needs to learn is to communicate, because otherwise he's going to lose his job, because there's thousands of people that will be able to do his job when he starts at the age of 18. So what I'm teaching him is the hard lesson that if you're going to be late, you communicate that you're going to be late. If your transport is not pitching up, you phone the school and you say, my transport did not pitch up. Please keep me a bowl of porridge. Please excuse me, I am going to be late. It's out of my control. And that shift in the community has been huge and beautiful to see. And now we try to replicate everything that we've learned here in a government public school, not filtered children, not children that wrote competency tests, in the reality of the South African child. And we go replicate that in our other schools in a cost model that makes sense and that can scale.
It really is, it's wow to me to think that you are managing, and I mean, it's actually so brilliantly simple, but you're managing to get responsibility and discipline instilled in those kids by just saying, I'm not going to prevent you from having breakfast. You know, it's not a punishment that, or you're not being punished because your taxi is late. But if you don't have the responsibility to communicate, I mean, that's like a small thing. I didn't even think of that when you started with the story, you know, to say, but just communicate. It's such a small thing, but it shows so much responsibility towards what I need to get to do today, and what prevents me from doing that. I can again take a little bit of ownership of that, in the sense that at least I communicate. I think that's brilliant. I'm speechless with everything you're telling me, because you have got such a lovely model. I can picture in my mind how this is working, and I think it is working, because otherwise you would not be sitting here and saying it's working. With the challenges, it really is. This is going to be one of my favorite episodes.
Well, you just come and visit. You're welcome to come and visit.
Yeah, but I'm just so impressed. You know, I was very impressed when I spoke to Zonke about the Leap Institute and what they're doing in the schools. They're really making a difference in the schools. And you too. I mean, you are really a tangible difference. This is not just about talking about it, and we are, and we should, and we must, you know, which is your popular political speech. We must, we will. You are actually saying we have. You know, we've done it. It's working, and really, I respect you. You know, if I had a uniform, I would salute Apex Schools, because what you're doing is brilliant. But okay, coming back to this podcast. Otherwise, I told you at the beginning I'm going to drift. When I want to come back to the blended learning slightly. Just want to understand a bit more of what that entails. So you are using Moodle, you said. And you have got, and I just want to make sure I understand this. So you've got a blended learning approach inside school hours, where the kids are writing tests, quizzes, and the teachers are monitoring those as they go along. So is it like, let's say the test has got 10 questions. How do the teacher know which 10 of the group of 50 struggles with question 2? Because I'm also involved in Moodle. You know, I've got my own Moodle, so I'm very familiar with the Moodle environment, and I'm just trying to, and I'll tell you now what I'm doing. after school again, but just trying to understand a little bit about how you practically implement this blended approach inside school hours.
Yeah, so no, absolutely. So there's a few things. So firstly, the word blended, right, is used across sectors and I often find everybody's kind of got their own understanding of what blended is. So maybe just to frame what it means for us. So we have said that there are certain things that teachers do incredibly well, right? Teachers are excellent at building relationships, building rapport with students, being a pastoral carer. Then teachers are also really excellent at explaining things on a granular level that a child is struggling to understand. Okay. But then there are things in the reality of the classroom that prevents the teacher from being able to do this. One of it's admin, doing the register, handing out the question papers, making sure everybody handed it back in, doing the demerit and the merit system on the discipline system, making sure they respond to all the emails, doing question analysis. Those are the things that takes up the time. And when I was a teacher, we would always joke and say, you've got to hate it when your teaching gets in the way of your work. And what that comments on is just that you have so much to do that's got nothing to do with the child in the class, right? So we knew that's one of the issues, one of the hurdles in teaching. We also know that technology can bring information in an innovative way. It can help a child build schema because it gives visuals, it can give videos, it can translate. And so we said, we don't want to do an online school because we don't believe that the average South African child benefits from online just because of the lack of structure and support necessarily at home. I mean, for a child to do online schooling, it must be a very disciplined child that's got a quiet space to work, like constant internet, a device. Like there's a lot of things that the kids that we serve is not necessarily gonna have. We believe that the school provides that thing that I spoke about earlier on, the safe environment. Like, so what is it that we can pull from technology to alleviate the teacher? And what is it that we can pull from other humans that can alleviate the teacher? And so our model is based on that concept that you're making the human do what they can do best so that the next component can do what they do best. So technology is good at, in our opinion, providing content or delivering content in a creative, interesting, innovative way. Technology is also great at collecting data quicker than any human can in class. Okay, so that's what technology does for us. Facilitators, we started training on the admin component and helping to manage the class. So they also help with academic support. It depends on, we hire on 2 levels. So they become like that support for the teacher. So alleviating the teacher from the daily admin tasks so that the teacher can just focus on intervention, responding to what the kids struggle with. And so what you'll have in our class is, let's say we follow a traditional timetable. We have a very structured timetable. Our kids don't self-pace. I almost want to say on like a overall approach, but if there's a child that can self-pace, we allow that child to do it to a certain extent. So let's say it's maths period, teacher comes in, the teacher will say, okay guys, we're doing lesson 14 on the LMS on A Squared is our platform's name. We're doing lesson 14 on A Squared. That child will then log on, everybody, all 100 of them, log on to lesson 14 on A Squared. In front of them, they have a workbook that we create alongside with the lessons that's printed. So that if I don't have a device at home or internet, I take my workbook with. It's like a study guide and I can continue there. Also practicing that skill of writing and analyzing, and that's so important for children. So they have the workbook in front of them, they have the lesson in front of them. The teacher and the facilitators have a dashboard that we built on top of Moodle that pulls the data from the lesson. It reports on completion. So every 20 seconds it updates. So who's done with the first section, second section, etc. And then it also reports on performance. But just to quickly park there, you asked about the quizzes, etc. We follow the pedagogical approach called gradual release of responsibility. Basically, what that boils down to is, when I was in school, you often enter class, teacher will teach for 40 minutes. Are you with me? Yes, ma'am. Bell rings. There you go. Our brains don't learn like that. So if you look at like Vygotsky's theory, learning being a social construct, if you look at the limited working memory that all of us have, no matter how clever we are, our working memory is incredibly limited. So this approach focuses on chunking the lesson into bits and pieces. The first chunk of that lesson is a small quiz that's testing prior knowledge. So 4 minutes, every lesson starts with a small quiz. Now, there's some classroom management reasons why this works, even pen to paper in a traditional class. The child focuses, they're tapping into their prior knowledge of the subject, they're writing first before speaking, so discipline is better. But the major thing is it gives data. So if children had to be able to, I don't know, multiply in this lesson, in the previous lesson, they had to understand the different symbols, knowing what's multiplication and division. That test will just test that bit. And when the teacher then sees 60% does not understand it, they're going to stop the class, they take their headphones off, and they just reteach that thing that's setting the child up. We've also built in feedback into those quizzes, telling a child why their response is wrong. Because, you know, like a system like Moodle will kick out, it's wrong, this is the correct answer, but that doesn't retrain my brain to think correctly about it moving into the lesson. So that's the first chunk of the lesson. Then we move on to the part that we compare to a traditional lesson where the content is taught. And this is done. I have 34 teachers across South Africa creating these lessons. Some of them are still in the classroom during the day. Some of them have quit the classroom, but they love teaching. And so this consists of like small video clips, not longer than 5 minutes, with framing questions. Maybe they click on a map, maybe they go on a virtual tour, but it's where the content is delivered. This is usually around 7 minutes long. And then the child goes to the next part, which is collaborative. And so this is often where the system will tell them, now turn to your partner and type on Google Maps the area that we just learned about and go and find these 3 things that the area is known for, whatever. So it's a bit of collaboration. Only once that is done, they go into independent practice. And this can then also be an online quiz or pen to paper in the workbook. So more data points being fed. And the lesson ends then with what we call an exit ticket, which is now testing whether the objective has been met. So every lesson is structured like that, all 4,000 that we have, and we're still building. Every lesson has got the same structure. But now, because of that data on the dashboard that we've built and how quickly it updates, and we've also spent a lot of time around how do we visualize it to make it user-friendly, teachers and facilitators can very quickly see who's lagging, so compliance. So there's focus on compliance from the facilitator side, and then competence is focused by the teacher side. So I always call the facilitator like the sweeper, like sweeping through the class, going, hey, I see you taking a little bit long with this section. What's up? Do you need help? Guys, there's 4 minutes left. We have to hurry. The teacher's the one that focuses on the competence. And they're looking at the responses and seeing what the kids struggle with. And then at the end of every day, we have what we call a close the gap period, where a teacher that teaches like 3 or 4 subjects will go, where was my problem area in which class? And then they do a traditional reteach on that topic alone. We also have in our classes what we call breakout rooms. So it's like glass panel door attached to the class, and it can take about 30 kids. So sometimes we'll pull the 30 kids in there. Teacher goes and teach, the rest of the class continues with the lesson online.
As just a small summary, effectively what you have is a continuous baseline assessment.
Correct. 100% correct.
And I've started now at the beginning of this year with something exactly the same. And I know the challenges that I face, to try and get this implemented. It's crazy because what I do is I provide between 3 and 5 questions, mathematical questions, that is about 1 to 2 weeks behind the ATPs, and I provide this on a Monday morning. And it's there, from Monday to Friday, it's there to do exactly what you are doing. What went missing in the last 2 weeks since you've done fractions in class, since you've done factorization, whatever, let's just diagnose. I call it a diagnosis. Specifically because I don't want it to be a test. A test you can fail. This is not something you can fail. It's just something that points out what is missing. And it really is a challenge. I'm being honest with you. It's a big challenge to get the and that's why my previous comment about ambition came in, because that's been my experience with the learners. They just don't care. You're giving them this opportunity to just see every week with a small test what is not in place. And it's a real challenge for me to try and get buy-in, from the learners and the parents in this. And you've managed to make this work. So again, well done with that. I'm sure there's been some.
Definitely.
I want to say I'm sure there's been some forcing of management. This is the way it will happen. you know, which I think is important to get some authority into it somewhere along the line. But just the fact that you've managed to make this work period after period after period, and the children are buying into it, that's great. That really is excellent.
Yeah, look, it takes a lot of people with a lot of effort and consistency on a daily basis, and we definitely don't always get it right. But what we have found is when your baseline is data-driven instruction, and we keep going back to that, learning is moving. Even when you have someone new in their journey as a teacher, even when you have a difficult class or difficult student, the learning keeps moving because you are, I always say technology is not a plaster for a festering wound. Like, you can't just plug it in and think it's going to solve issues. And I think that's often the mistake we make in classes. We're like, okay, this app is going to solve all the mathematical issues in my class. No, the implementation and the driving and the monitoring of that app might as well serve some of the issues that you have in your class. But somebody needs to take accountability for it. Somebody needs to drive it. So we use quite a few like supportive apps in classes. And for example, when they do the maths app, we have normed on the fact that a student is not doing that app without a piece of paper and a pen in front of them working out calculations. Because otherwise it's a betting game. They're just like typing in numbers and they like waiting for it to kick out. So once again, educating children, maths is a process. You need to go through the process to get to the answer. You cannot just type in the answer because then you didn't go through the process. So now it's not good enough if I just see you typing in answers. I'm circulating, my facilitators are circulating, and we're ensuring children are working up numbers. They're actually calculating, they're struggling, they're making mistakes. That's how they move. And so I think it's often around, it's very difficult to do it from the outside, Harry. Like we always say, we're not tech experts. We're not building experts, although we build physical schools. We have experts that help us with it, but what we are is we're implementers. We are on the ground, we're in the classes every day. And I think that makes it a lot easier than coming from the outside. I mean, I salute people that come from the outside because I think it's very challenging. Although you have a solution, and we all know the solution is going to make everybody's lives easier, it takes time to adapt and see that it's actually going to make your life easier. It takes buy-in, and that's challenging.
Well, on that point, I mean, I'm so glad we had this conversation this morning, because my mind has been opened slightly to the idea of ownership as being the key factor. Now, I've been focusing a lot on the ambition or the aspiration, but I think the ownership of the child is actually where I should change my approach, making them understand that this is not about me. I'm already an adult. I've passed matric. You know, I've got my own business. I'm doing what I do. You need to take ownership of your future. And if you take ownership, maybe then aspiration and ambition will start coming in, depending on your frame of reference. But I do think it's an important distinction for me that I've learned in this conversation with you is maybe to just change my approach from trying to convince them what I know and making them understand what they don't know, and go and find out why it's important to do well in school. It's, you know, I've often said that in order to be more than average, you'd need to do more than average. But it sounds so simple. I've often found that the kids don't really understand what I'm saying if I say that, because what does it mean to do more than average? And you at Apex Schools are certainly getting this right. The fact that those kids pitch up is more than average. You know, the fact that they sit through those lessons, the fact that your teachers can monitor baseline continuously with this blended approach is brilliant, but it's doing more than average. That's why it's brilliant. You know, you are seeing the results of that. So I want to steer the conversation slightly towards the AI, which is what this podcast really is all about, is AI in education. And just ask you, first of all, I mean, you've got a few responses that I can read if you want, but maybe just from the hip. What are your feelings about AI in education as a learning tool? Because the one thing that you've mentioned earlier is that technology can do so much things. And from my perspective, the one important thing about technology is that it can duplicate. You know, where one teacher cannot be with 50 children at the same time. It's just impossible. Technology can. 50 of them get marked continuously on Moodle as they progress. Moodle can handle that workload. The teacher needs to then just work with the results. And I believe, and this is why I started this podcast, and this is why I do what I do, is that AI can magnify and amplify that process even further. And we will get to after school, which is where I'm working, but just inside school hours. What do you think of AI as a learning tool, not an administrative tool specifically?
Yeah, so I think my first comment is that it's here. That's my first opinion, is that it is here and it's not going anywhere. And so we've never had a kind of a knee-jerk reaction to it to say, no, like shun it, ban it. We always had the response to go, okay, well, how can we use this? So just quickly, one of the things, so we are currently, I mentioned to you, but we are currently using an AI tutor as kind of like an extended pilot. It's been year 3, so it's really an extended pilot, but it works well for us. Where the AI tutor is set up based on the curriculum and specifically what the topic that the children are busy with. And you put it on Socratic mode, which means it probes children. One of the things that I've noticed that the students, the demographic that we serve really struggle with, and I don't actually think it's based on the demographic, I think it's a generation thing, is how kids struggle to converse and express their emotions and express their thoughts, string it in a sentence. Really, really challenging. And I mean, there's a lot to say about that. It's probably around like the culture that we live in, the TikTok emoji era, where we don't really have to speak. We just kind of send a thumbs up and somebody knows what that means. But our kids really struggle to do that. And part of creating thought is to be able to verbalize thought, right? And converse about it and bicker about it and analyze about it. And that's how you figure things out. So I think AI is a great partner for a child in doing that, pushing the child to think and speak and type what it is that they're trying to say so that they get better in expressing themselves. It's also a great tool to break down concepts to the core so that it can lead a child to actually understand something that they haven't understood. And it ties back to what I said when I told you a high school teacher is not trained to teach someone on a grade 4 level, yet a child enters on a grade 4 level. But with an AI tutor or even just AI in general, I can say to AI, hey, explain this to me as if I'm a grade 4 student, although it's grade 8 topic. And AI will be able to adapt the language, adapt the examples. I can say, I live in Cape Town, I live in Eersterivier, and it will adapt the context. Our humans just don't have the capacity to do that. We don't have time. We're going to have to put more teachers in the space, and we can't afford it. We can't afford it. Government can't afford it. It's not an option. So I think firstly, AI personalizes further, but also can possibly train and teach our kids how to converse better and how to express themselves better. It's great in feedback. Look, feedback is a gift, and we give feedback as much as possible, but we're currently piloting an AI marking program. And the amount of feedback it can give a child per answer, 100 scripts in 2 hours, is absolutely phenomenal. And if we're saying feedback is a gift and we want our children to be able to take feedback and apply it, then something like an AI grader is going to be huge in that, pivotal in that section. And then the other thing for me is also just that one of our biggest challenges is, I think, in the South African education system, is to move away from this culture of compliance, where kids believe, parents believe, some teachers believe, some principals believe, that when I'm in class and I'm here, that's enough. I'm here, I have my book here, that's enough, I'll pass. That's not learning. Learning is engaging, learning is active. And so we really struggle with it. Learning is hard.
That's the one thing that came out in a lot of conversations so far, is that you need to make peace with it, that learning is hard. It's never going to be easy. If it's easy, it's not learning.
And so that's where that whole, I don't know if you're familiar with the proximal zone of development this ties back to Vygotsky's theory, is saying there's a sweet spot in a lesson where the child is pushed enough that it's not too easy, but it's not too difficult. And we call it productive struggle. That productive struggle is vital in learning, but you need an appetite for it. Otherwise, you're gonna sit back. So I think for us, what we focus on a lot is to use AI to try and push children to engage with the content on a deeper level and not merely comply and complete, clicking through it, answering more or less what they think, but to actually grapple with it and go, okay, like, for example, this is a very simplified example, but in maths literacy the other day, we spotted that our children really struggle to read tariffs from a bill. They don't understand how to extract information from a bill. And so what we did is on the AI tutor, we loaded a bunch of South African bills examples. And instead of asking them, how much does the owner owe from last month? We flipped the questions with the AI tutor to ask them questions that makes them think about the reality of it. So if I fail to pay last month, where on this tariff will I be able to see that I'm owing more money? Here is a hint. If the child says, I don't know, okay, here is a hint, think about whatever, and then gives the term word. Now the child has to go look at the tariff, then respond to the tutor. Then he says, okay, great. Now that you know this, you'll be able to calculate that. And it leads the child to engage with the tariff and actually dissect it in order to understand it. That is huge. That is huge. And that is something a good teacher can do, absolutely, but not with 40 kids in a class or 100 kids in a class.
For sure. And I just want to tie back to the beginning of this conversation, you know, with compliance. You know, if the child sits there and wants to do more, is receptive for more, then you've already achieved something about the expectation that child has of him or herself. They are expecting more of themselves by wanting to know more than just pitching up and sitting there. And I think that compliance, or just let's call it pitching up and sitting there, is such a big problem in most schools because you know I'm now here. Now it's your job to make me interested. It's your job to make it interesting. It's your job as a teacher to get me excited about whatever we're going to do in the next 30 minutes. Whereas you've managed to crack that nut by making the children come there with an expectation of themselves. And if they got that expectation, then they will interact with the AI even more because they are now curious. You know, and Einstein said, I'm nothing special. I'm just extremely curious. And curiosity has its own place in learning, but in terms of the AI as a duplication of what the teacher cannot do, just basically, you know, moving towards the end of this podcast, I want to touch on what do you do, because this is my field and this is obviously where I'm very interested in, is after school hours. You know, when those kids sit there, because ultimately, I mean, you're doing wonders from what I can hear. You're doing absolutely wonders inside school hours for learning. It's not just about ticking boxes. It's not just about looking good, you know, when an inspector arrives. You are actually doing or making a difference. And, you know, from what I can hear, it's literally you making and creating a difference in these kids' lives. But what exactly do you have or propose for those hours late at night, 7, 8 o'clock at night, when they're sitting and they need to do their homework? They need to prepare for what they've learned or for a test, that's an upcoming test or something. And specifically from the perspective of AI.
So that's an interesting question because the answer is now different than it was 3 years ago. Because when we started the blended model, we worked within the Israel community, and the reality was that a lot of our kids did not have their own devices. They didn't have access to internet at home. They might not have had electricity, and that complicates your expectation of them after school. In all the schools that we work and own, transport is a big challenge because parents drive. The dream is to create schools. That's why we always try and find property that's within a community, because we want our children to walk to school. We want them to have accessibility to a good school that's walking distance from the community. But because parents are so desperate and finding place in a school is so scarce, we always have kids traveling from afar. And so they are very reliant on the transport, which means you can't, on the whim, decide you're going to have a quick extra class after school because kids need to leave. Their buses are there to fetch them. What we are seeing now slowly as the years pass by is the amount of children with devices are growing. It's becoming more accessible and less expensive. In Kayamandi, Kayamandi is the first fully fiber township in the Western Cape. And so everybody there, in theory, has access to fiber connectivity. You buy like a bundle and then you have access to it. So that's very exciting. In Conradi Park, where Epic Finance is now built, there's also fiber connectivity throughout the entire, there's 4,000 living units. And so there's fiber there. So in theory, you start thinking, okay, more children have access. What we do in that case is we set up the AI tutors to extend the learning. So for example, if they have to work on a reflective essay, we set up an AI tutor and say, like, you're going to help this child with a reflective essay, you're going to help them with the process writing, this is what a good hook looks like, this is what the introduction should entail, this is what the body should have, these are the possible themes, here's the rubric, let me load the rubric, here's the study marking guidelines from the department, let me load that. Please, under any circumstances, do not give a child an answer. Please don't correct their grammar, rather underline it and tell them to go find the correct answer. Then the child can engage with that tutor after school while they're doing their project and get feedback per paragraph. So that's one thing. The other answer is not what we do, it's what the children do. So they are incredibly resourceful. The moment a majority of them have never touched a laptop. We work on Chromebooks when they start school. 2 weeks in, they start doing things they should not be doing. They do like sneaky team calls with each other during class time. And, like passing the note now is like a Zoom meeting with like notes being typed. But they also find these beautiful resources and they create quizzes for each other. And then they battle each other on quizzes on these platforms after hours. Yeah, but I think, to be honest with you, I think we can explore a lot more what we can offer after school. We've been limited, and maybe to be honest, within our own thinking up until this point, where we just assumed our kids won't be able to access it. But now we're starting to see accessibility is increasing in technology and internet, and then we're going to have to push ourselves as well to give more.
Well, I'll give you a very good example. Zakeli Kulu, my second episode, the principal from Freya, he mentioned that because of the rural area where they stay, if it rains, the roads wash away. His learners cannot come to school because the roads are non-existent when it's raining. And I mean, it really pours when it rains in northern KwaZulu-Natal. So we talked about the fact that what he would like is an offline HTML file that the kids can download when they're at school, when they have connectivity, and when they are at home, they can, without internet, because I mean, they literally stay in areas where there is no cell phone signal, let alone fiber, but then they've got the offline HTML file, on their phones, which is then like a tutor. So we are working on that currently, him and me. We are currently working on a project like that. I created one this morning for decimal fractions, which is running 99% correctly offline, where the children can actually have a tutor. It's not interactive, it's not talking, but there is like a section for notes, if you like, and then interactive exercises to learn what you don't know. And I think that is a big portion of teaching the children that it's okay to fail. It's good if you fail. It's good if you make mistakes, because now you know what you don't know. It's very difficult to learn something when you don't know what you don't know. And I think AI has the ability, and this is obviously, like I said, what I'm focusing on is to try and convince them to ask questions. That literally is my driving force in the business, is to say it's okay to ask a question. There is no or no. There is one stupid question. That's what I always tell my students. There is one stupid question, and that's the one you don't ask. Everything else is fine. Making mistakes, learning from your mistakes. I think Elon Musk, I don't know how many of these learners really know who he is, apart from the media frenzy. But Elon Musk fails fast. That's his motto. Let me fail fast, because then I can improve and try again. it's such a brilliant philosophy, and in learning, I think that is excellent. You know, to really learn by making a mistake and learning from it, and that's where AI, especially when the teacher is not there, can really play a big role, in my opinion. And I would like to conclude with that, with opinion from yourself. But it duplicates what a good tutor or a good teacher will do if you were sitting across the table. By just interacting from that perspective of, yes, it is not correct, you made a mistake, but let's learn from it. What are your thoughts on that approach? Am I missing the boat altogether, or is that something that you think will also one day somebody will speak to me in a podcast and say, Kerry, listen, you guys have done it correct?
No, I can tell you, Patty, you guys have done it good. No, I 100% agree with you. Look, we always say, like, firstly, after you've asked the question for the sixth time, the teacher's going to get irritated. But AI does not get irritated. You can ask the same question multiple times, and AI will keep being patient and responding to it. So definitely, like, a part of the work that we do is to kind of capacitate other schools in using our platform, etc. And the schools that we're currently helping, our majority are like small rural schools, like Deep Transkei or whatever the case may be. And there the issue is getting teachers. So just getting someone to come and live there is a challenge. And so what's happening now is all of a sudden you're giving them, and this is not through LMS, but I mean, AI also plays a role in it. You're giving them a standard of a good teacher, and AI can be that teacher, that will never be able to reach them due to their geographical context. And I think that's super exciting, is to have AI, and that for me is equitable education and not equal education. Because we know that equality is giving everybody the same chance, but not everybody needs the same chance. We have to meet them at where they're at. So AI can give equitable education because it matches where the child is at. And that is really powerful. If it's handled well and it's handled responsibly, and you create an environment that's disciplined and learning induced, and the adults in the space are doing what the adults need to do, I mean, the things that we're going to create is just super exciting.
The one thing that has really come out, in the podcast since I've started it, and I want to share this with you, because I don't think we've used this word once, but it's a very important word, and it obviously is intrinsic in your approach. But I just want to come from the angle of what I've discovered, in conversing with different people in the education sphere, is that teachers tend to think, I mean, this is one opinion, teachers tend to think that AI is coming for my job, because that is a worldwide a scare that is being given out there, that AI is coming for your job. And the one thing that we've discovered is that no, a good teacher cannot be replaced by AI. And you've touched on it right from the beginning about the nurturing, the humanity, the empathy, everything that a teacher can bring to the table that you can never program into a computer. No matter how hard you try, AI will never be able to look at a child and see the shoulders sagging and understand, okay, something's not on, but what is important to make the transition from the great teacher to AI being a great learning tool is pedagogy. And I think that is something you've already managed in getting the agents, the AI agents, to understand what the specific teacher wants. Not what the education system wants, not what the world wants, not what the big corporates wants, but what that one teacher that knows his or her subject, what do they want when the child is not with them, and there is a tool. And when you say, the rural Transkei areas, difficult to get somebody to go and relocate to live there as a teacher, you can actually, with a great teacher in Esterrefuur, you can transmit the great pedagogy to that remote area. Now it becomes that child's responsibility to set an expectation of, what do I do with this resource? And I think you are on such a winning recipe here. I really think you've got such a nice winning idea of getting the children and their communities to take ownership, because that then will give them expectations and ambitions ultimately, and this is going to take this country forward. Really, I believe this. I'm so impressed with this conversation this morning.
Thank you, Larry.
It's really opened my eyes to something that I've sometimes felt I want to just pull my hair out, with frustration, because I've got the same aspirations as you, but I've never managed really to get it done and implemented in the way you have done. So, well done. Please convey, and I mean, you'll get the opportunity to share this video later on, with everybody in your organization, but please convey sincere congratulations from myself. This is really, and I'm sure we're going to get comments in the video as well, people agreeing with this, but well done. It's
Thank
great.
you, Harry. Yeah, I just maybe kind of semi in conclusion, but there's a lot of brokenness in our country, and there's a lot of heartache and injustice, and it's infuriating. And to be honest, that's partially often what drives many of us in the team, is that being infuriated with the injustice in our country. But there's also a lot of amazing people that's doing really good work. And I'm not talking about us as a team. I'm talking about people backing our work and believing in our work, and people in government supporting us and being excited alongside us and encouraging us to keep doing it. So despite everything that sometimes might feel like just doom and gloom, I believe in this country's potential, and I believe in the people in this country, and there are people that deeply, deeply care what happens to South Africa, and those are the people that they find each other. We find each other, the circle's not that big, and they drive the change. So it's always encouraging to see that and experience it, and like having conversations with you and knowing there's space for so many of us to bring our approach to the education sector, because it's wide and it's complex and it's beautiful and it's broken, and it needs people to pay attention to it and think about it in a new, innovative way.
Yeah, but there's a saying that says 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step. And I think between what you guys are doing and what Leap Institute is doing is that first step. I mean, it would be nice to have been like 10 kilometers down the line already, with millions of children and thousands of schools on the same trajectory and the same mindset. But just the fact that you've managed to get it done, it's no longer just a dream. It's no longer just an idea. You actually managed to get it done. That impresses me so much. It's unreal. I can't even begin to tell you how proud I am to be talking to you today. To say, I've managed to drill into somebody who's found a solution, and I'm going to share this out with the world. And when I share this on LinkedIn and YouTube, you're going to see my exclamation marks. Because this message really, really needs to get out there. But congratulations once more. Please pass that on to everybody on the team, from the management right through to the learners that you may have in contact with. Tell them that you've spoken to somebody on YouTube, and I commend them. I really say well done to those kids who are taking ownership. It's really, really good.
No, they are amazing. Thank you. I will definitely.